Hi, this is Miss Camp. Today we will continue reading in Magic Treehouse, Merlin Missions #1, Christmas in Camelot. You will only see me and not Archie because Archie and I just finished reading and I realized when we were all done that I forgot to hit the record button. So I am going to read this part again that he and I just finished. And then you'll see Archie in the next video. So here we are with our book. And one thing that we did to begin was look at some pictures. So this story begins with a prologue where it talks about the setting. And it lets us know that it begins in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania. And then it's going to go to Camelot, the long ago kingdom of King Arthur. And so those two settings are what we have for this story. First, we have Pennsylvania, and then we have Camelot. So I wanted to compare those two settings using pictures. So here are some pictures I found just from looking on the internet for what does Pennsylvania look like. And here is a picture of Pennsylvania in the fall when the leaves are turning colors. So this is not a city. This is just what we call being out in the country. This would be an example of a town that is in the country, not a big city. You don't see big, tall skyscrapers. There might be a church with a steeple and then some houses around among the trees. In the winter, it might look like this when you're driving home. So not many houses around. Again, this would be in the country. And on a snowy night, it might look like this when you are driving home. Or on a morning after it snows, you might go outside and notice that the road has not been plowed yet. What fun it would be to put on a pair of skis and just ski down the road. And a house might look like this. This house, if you look here at the windows, has put a wreath on each window. That is something that many houses will do near the Christmas holiday. So that is a look at Pennsylvania. Over here, we're going to look at 5 different illustrations of Camelot. Well, I did a little research to find out if Camelot and King Arthur are real or if they are just fictional, just pretend. And we learned when Archie and I were reading before, and we will read that today, that King Arthur is a legend, and that a legend is something that might have one time started with a little bit of fact, something real, but then the story kept getting bigger and bigger and changed and added to it, and until it finally got to a point where it's just not true at all. We can't even tell the difference between what's true and, or if any of it ever was true. So it just becomes so big over time, and no one can really quite remember back to when it started or why it started or how it started. From the research I did, some people, historians, a historian is someone who studies history. History is the real things that happened in the past before today. Some historians have looked back over stories and poems that have been written long, long ago. And they found that the very first time there was a mention of King Arthur was maybe 1,500 years ago. It was not proof that King Arthur existed, but it was the first time he was mentioned. Some historians think that there might have been a character who was real, who was named Arthur, but it was more likely that maybe he was a soldier or a military leader and not a king closed up in a castle. But all of the other characters that have been added to the story, Sir Lancelot, Gawain, Guinevere, Merlin, Morgan le Fay, and even the castle Camelot, the sword Excalibur, the sword in the stone. All of these pieces are just fictional. They have been added to the story over hundreds of years. Well, if Camelot did not really exist, then an illustrator can kind of make it look however he wants to or she wants to. And so here are 5 different illustrations of what Camelot might look like in the imagination of the person doing the drawing. So there's one. Here's another one. You can see the waterfalls. Here's a third. Here's a fourth. And here's a fifth. So in each of these pictures, you can see a castle. So those are what Camelot might look like. So that's where they will go in the story, and this is where they are coming from, in the winter. Okay. We also had talked in our last time about a dove, and here we can see a picture of a dove. And also in the winter, we say that the branches of the trees are bare. That means there are no leaves on the branches of the tree because the leaves have fallen off. So those would be trees with bare branches. Now, the tree house is in an oak tree. An oak tree we can find by looking at the shape of the leaf. Here are 4 different types of oak trees. And where I was growing up in Connecticut, we had oak trees. And I was looking at these leaves, and the leaves that look a little bit similar to the oak trees that I remember are the black oak and maybe the northern red oak. But I'm pretty sure it's the black oak. I looked a little bit more at the black oak leaf. This is what the black oak leaf looks like. And these are the acorns from that tree. And both those acorns and the shape of the leaf look familiar to me from my childhood. So I think I am remembering the black oak tree. So these are leaves from a black oak tree. And again, you can look at the shape of the leaves to know for sure. Here are some oak trees. I don't know what type of oak tree this is, but this is an oak tree. You can see it's a very big tree. And this is also an oak tree. These are nice, strong trees, and so they're good for building a tree house. So this is a tree house in an oak tree, and you can also see the rope ladder that is coming down. It makes it easier to climb up there. And here's our picture again of bare branches, and this is a scroll. A scroll. And then we also heard about a knight. This would be a knight. I think this is a real person wearing a knight costume. And you can see how it protects their head and even their hands and all parts of their body so that they can be protected from someone else using a sword. This is not a real person. This is kind of a statue or a figurine, but it shows how a knight might look. The knight is covered with armor. The knight also has a shield and a sword. A knight would often ride on a horse. Now, this horse does not look dressed for battle because it's wearing something kind of like a celebration, maybe in a parade. But if this knight was going into battle, I think on the horse, you would see armor to protect the horse also. And here's another picture of a castle. And then when you have a castle, you will see things that look like this. these are called turrets. That is this word right here, turrets. So that is something you would see on a castle. Okay, we also learned about a drawbridge. They were going into the castle on a drawbridge, and this is what a drawbridge has. So this bridge can be raised up so that you cannot cross this space right here. So having a drawbridge can protect the castle from people getting in who they don't want to get in. And then they saw Morgan le Fay carrying a lantern. So a lantern could look like this. It has a candle in it. Or it could look like this. Now, a Chinese lantern, which looks like this, is not the kind of lantern they're talking about in this story. And they also talked here about frost-covered ground. Ground covered with frost is not ground covered with snow. But you can see here in this picture, the grass on the ground has frozen. It's not covered in a blanket of snow, but the grass has frozen. And so when you look at the grass when you look across the grass, it might look white. That's frost. That would be frost. And if you step on frozen grass, the grass will break and you will hear it snap. Okay, we also had learned about, we heard about a wizard. And a wizard is not a real person. A wizard is a type of character used in a kind of fiction story. The kind of story is called a fantasy. Fantasy is a type of fiction story that has magic in it. It is a story of good versus evil. And it might have a character who is a wizard. And because a wizard is not real, we don't know exactly what a wizard looks like. So just like with Camelot, the illustrator can make the wizard look however he wants to. And so each wizard might look a little different. But when you look at lots and lots of pictures that illustrators have drawn of wizards, something that I noticed is almost all of them have a pointy hat, a long staff or rod, and are wearing some kind of cloak and have a long beard. I just happened to notice that in most of the pictures I've seen of someone illustrating a wizard. You can see his pointy hat, his long beard, his staff or his rod. And then, and we also talked about the orchard. This is an orchard. So it would be a grove of trees or a group of trees that have fruit on them. So this would be an apple orchard. Where we left off was when they had met Morgan le Fay, and she had told them what we think is the problem in the story, which is that an enemy of King Arthur named Mordred had a dark wizard who cast a spell over the whole kingdom of Camelot. And the spell robbed Camelot of all its joy. That means the whole kingdom, King Arthur's kingdom, Camelot, had no joy in it, no happiness. It would just be the opposite of happiness: sadness, despair, discouragement, disappointment. People just not feeling happy about anything. That is a huge problem. And we think that might be the problem in this story that needs to be fixed. So Morgan le Fay is the one that they thought brought them to Camelot. And she said, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. And remember that the invitation to Camelot had been signed by, there it is. It had been signed here by an M. And they had thought this was Morgan, but now we think maybe it was Mordred, or Mordred's magician. We'll have to see who that M is, who really invited them to come. Now, Morgan le Fay is an interesting character because also she is not real. There is no person who ever existed named Morgan le Fay. So that means, again, an illustrator can kind of have a fun time thinking about, with his or her imagination, how do we want to draw a picture of her? Do we want to make her look good or evil? Do we want her to be a good character or an evil character? And different authors and illustrators that use her character have different ideas about how to use her. So you can see that here is what one illustrator is using, is how one illustrator is thinking about what Morgan might look like. Here is another picture of her where she looks very different. You can see she's holding a sword right here. Here is another picture. I think this one might be from the same story or with the same illustrator as this one, these two, because I think the crown that's on her head and it's kind of that fur on her shoulders and the little bit of the armor on her body looks similar. Here is another one where very different artist, different kind of painting. Here is one where she's a character in a story and she just looks like a girl. She does not look like an enchantress who can do spells. Now, even Barbie, the company that makes the Barbie doll, has made a doll called Morgan le Fay. And this is how they made her look. Now, when you look at all of those pictures, she has dark hair in every one. But what I found interesting here is that when Morgan first shows up in this story, it says a woman was crossing the castle drawbridge. She wore a long cloak and carried a lantern. Her white hair blew in the wind. So either this author pictures Morgan as someone having white hair, or maybe her hair color has changed because Camelot, because of the spell put on Camelot. Okay, we will have to keep an eye out on her hair color in this story. So where we are starting today is where Jack and Annie have heard the problem that the spell has robbed Camelot of all its joy. And Annie says, "What? All its joy?" whispered Annie. "Yes," said Morgan. "For months, Camelot has been without music, without celebration, and without laughter." Let's take a look here at this word without, because they're using that 3 times. Without means it doesn't have it. There isn't any. That means there's no music. There's no celebration. Celebration is when we have a party and we sing and dance and are happy about things. There's no celebration. There's not even any laughter. No one's laughing at all. "Oh no," said Annie. "What can we do to help?" said Jack. Morgan smiled sadly. "This time, I don't think you can do anything," she said. "But perhaps it will lift Arthur's spirits to see you both again. Come, let us go inside the castle." We're going to talk for just a minute about what it means to lift someone's spirits. We've talked before about how in English we use the word heart to talk about how someone is feeling, especially if someone is feeling really good or not so good. And so we talk about hope and disappointment. So what is hope? Well, in our life, we never know what's going to happen in the future. We only know what's happening right now, and we know what already finished happening, but we don't know what's going to happen next. But we know, if we think about it, we might know what we want to happen, or what we wish would happen. We think about what could happen. And when we think about what could happen, we think about, what would I like to happen? What do I wish for? What do I want? How do I want things to work out? But we don't know. So we can choose. We can either worry about it or we can feel hope. If we worry about it, that's when we're like, I really don't know what's going to happen, but I really know what I want to happen, but I think maybe it won't work out the way I want. And I don't know. And so I'm like worried. Hope, on the other hand, is when we don't know what's going to happen. We know what we want to happen. And we think, maybe it will. I think it might. It could. I feel full of hope. I feel hopeful. I have a good feeling about what's going to happen. I think that it's going to work out just fine, or it will work out just the way I want. Or even if it doesn't work out the way I want, it will be okay. I'm not worried. I'm full of hope. So if we have hope, we say our heart is full, okay? We have high hopes. They're up here, high. But then a little bit of time goes by and it happens. And then we can think, did it happen the way we want? Or did it happen not the way we want? Well, if it didn't work out the way we wanted and something else happens, maybe we could feel really disappointed and sad. And we would say our heart sank, blah, 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 sink down here. So up here is the top, like floating on the water, and then blah, 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 blah. Down here would be sinking. So if our heart sank, then we would feel disappointed. We do not have hope anymore. We think, it did not work out the way we wanted. We feel sad and disappointed. On the other hand, maybe things don't work out the way we want, but instead of feeling disappointed, we can say, well, maybe I am a little disappointed, but it's okay. I can still choose to be happy or have hope that something good will still happen, or things will be okay. I can deal with it. I can handle it. I can look forward. So we use that word heart to talk about having hope or being disappointed, being happy or being sad. So we can talk about our heart being full, our heart sinking. And that's our heart in here, right? Going kaboom, 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 kaboom. But we're not talking about the heart that's in our body. We just use that word to talk about our feelings. We can also use the word spirits. So when we say lift someone's spirits, think of that high and low. So if we're lifting, we're bringing it up high. So if someone needs to have their spirits lifted, that means their spirits must be down here. And that means they're feeling sad. We say they're feeling low. That's low down here. They're feeling sad. If we lift their spirits up, then they can be feeling happy again. So using heart and spirits, we're talking about feelings. And we kind of use this idea of high and low. Lift up, sink, or drop. And that's referring to how a person is feeling. So if King Arthur needs to have his spirits lifted, that means right now he is very sad. And that is also a problem. Morgan held up her lantern and started toward the drawbridge. Jack and Annie hurried after her. As they walked through the outer courtyard, the frozen grass cracked under their sneakers. Okay, so let's take a quick look at this door here. You can see the pink line that I've made. That is showing the shape of an arch. And so going under the arch or through the arch is called going through an archway. And we will see that word here in just a minute. We can look for it. They followed Morgan over the bridge and through a tall gate. There were no signs of life in the castle's inner courtyard. If there are no signs of life, that means they're not seeing any people or animals or horses or anything. It's just going to be quiet. Where is everyone? Annie whispered to Jack. I don't know, he whispered back. Jack really wished they had a book about Camelot. It might help them understand what was going on. Remember that Jack, when we are reading our regular Magic Treehouse books, Jack always likes to have a book. Anytime Jack has a question, he thinks he can find the answer in a book. So he feels more comfortable if he has a book of information that he can think about his question, look in the book, find an answer, learn something, and that helps him. And right now he does not have a book because remember, they did not get to Camelot by pointing to a picture in a book and saying, I wish we could go there. There was no book. They just held up the invitation that came from that person, M. Well, Morgan led them to a huge archway. There's that word, archway, with 2 wooden doors. So the doors are made out of wood. She stopped and looked at them, and she said, I am afraid no book would help you tonight, Jack, she said. Jack was startled that Morgan had read his thoughts. You know, that's a little bit of an interesting sentence. Archie and I did not notice that sentence when we read this the first time. He had been thinking that or maybe he was whispering to Annie. He did not think that Morgan could hear him thinking about how he wished he had actually, it did say wished, right? It says right here, Jack really wished they had a book. So that's what he's thinking in his head. But Morgan could tell what he's thinking. That's called read his thoughts. So when you say read his thoughts, that means someone can tell what you're thinking, even though you don't say it out loud. Now, is that really possible in real life? Can someone really know what you're thinking for sure? Actually, that's not possible in real life. If you don't say your thoughts out loud, if you don't write them down, if you don't use sign language, if you just keep them in your head, then someone else cannot know 100% for sure what you're thinking. Now, if they know you really well, they might have a good guess, right? Maybe you have an expression on your face or in your eyes, or they can just tell by the way you're looking, or they just know you so well. They might have a really good guess, but they still can't crawl into your brain and know 100% for sure. So if someone knows 100% for sure, that would be, I think, a type of magic that can happen in a fantasy book or a fiction book. But we need to remember that we have to tell the difference between fact and fiction. And startled here means that he was surprised. But then Annie said, why not? Now she's answering Morgan. Morgan said, there's no book that's going to help you. And Annie says, why not? Right? And so Morgan answers, on all your other journeys, you visited real places and times in history, said Morgan. Camelot is different. Now, one thing that I might disagree with about that is we just finished reading Midnight on the Moon. And while the moon is a real place, they went into the future. And the future has not happened yet. And because it hasn't happened yet, we can't say that that time is real. In fact, when they went into the future, the author could come up with inventions that haven't even been invented yet, just in her imagination. So I'm not sure if you're talking about a story that takes place in the future, if you can say that is a real time in history, because a real time in history would be things in the past that have already happened. But in any case, she's saying that in these books, where they point to a book and they say, they point to a book and they say, I wish we could go there. And then the treehouse begins to spin and the wind begins to blow, and then they go someplace and they have the book with them to give them information. Those would be real places. She said, Camelot is different. How? Said Jack. Now, this is where we see this word legend, okay? The story of Camelot is legend, said Morgan. A legend is a story that begins in truth. Well, I was a little bit curious about that, and so I went to do some research on that. And I don't know that everyone would agree with that. I think we can say that maybe, because if something is a legend, maybe some people think it begins in truth, and maybe some people think it doesn't. I think, however it began was so long ago that no one really knows for sure anymore. But then imagination takes over. That's true. Different people in different times tell the story. They use their imaginations to add new parts. Okay, so all of those new parts that got added were Camelot, Sir Lancelot, Guinevere, Merlin, Morgan le Fay, Gawain, Excalibur. Okay, so the story was all added. Maybe there's some controversy or different opinions about whether or not there ever existed a person named Arthur. And the answer is maybe, but if he did, I don't think he was a king. That is how a legend is kept alive. Tonight, we'll add our part, said Annie. Yes, said Morgan, and please, I beg you. In the lantern light, she looked very serious. Do not let the story of Camelot end forever. Keep our kingdom alive. Of course we will, said Annie. Good, said Morgan. Come then, let us go into the great hall and see the king. Morgan lifted an iron latch and pushed open the heavy doors. Jack and Annie followed her into the dark castle. Here was a YouTube video. It was a TED talk or a TEDx talk TED Ed talk that talked about the King Arthur legends. The next chapter is called The Knights of the Round Table. And we are going to, in a minute, learn the word tapestry. And I wanted to just show you what a tapestry looks like. So here is inside of a castle, and on the wall, these are all tapestries. Tapestries look like a rug. They have been woven. That you would take threads and weave them together into a picture. But these tapestries are hung on the walls. And when they weave a picture into that rug, that tapestry, it tells a story. It's like an illustration, but instead of using paint, it's using thread. Here is another castle, and on the walls, you can see these tapestries. Well, if we look just at a tapestry, you can see they can have a lot of detail, and they can tell the picture can kind of tell a little story. But all of those colors are from different colors of thread. Here's another tapestry. You can see the lion and the unicorn in this one. And here is another tapestry. And you can have, just as they are on the wall, each one can kind of tell a different part of a story. And we're also going to see the word torch. So in these castles, the way they would have light is from this fire in a torch that gets put on the wall. Okay, so I want us to take a look at the first two sentences of this chapter right here. So first I will read it. A pair of torches dimly lit the drafty entrance hall of the castle. Shadows danced on the worn tapestries. In these two sentences, there is no action going on. If we were telling the story over again, we would not mention these two sentences. We would just say that Morgan, Jack, and Annie went into the castle. The action is the characters do something. So the three characters go into the castle. So why does the author need to give us any sentences like this if nothing is happening? It's because an author likes to change how we're feeling. The author likes to influence how we're feeling. So for example, we could start reading a book, and before we start reading it, we could be feeling happy. And then as we're reading the story, all of a sudden we find ourselves feeling sad or scared or surprised or disappointed or excited. But that's not how we were feeling before we started reading. And then as we are reading, our feelings change. Well, why did they change? How did they change? What made them change? That is the effect of the words written by the author. So the author needs to choose his or her words very carefully. When an author is writing a story, the only thing they can use are their words. If they're making a movie or a TV show, they can use picture and sound. The music, for example, that we hear with our ears can make us feel like, oh, what's going to happen? Or very happy or sad. The music can really change how we're feeling. The pictures that we see can change how we're feeling. But in a book, especially a chapter book that does not have very many pictures, the author can really only use words. So they're going to think about what words they use very carefully, especially the describing words. And so let's look at these 4 words that I've highlighted inside this pink circle. We see the word dimly, drafty, shadows, and worn, okay? Dimly means just a little bit of light, okay? So it's going to be really dark. That means you're walking into a castle. We already know there's nobody there, okay? They don't see or hear anybody. And it's pretty dark. So if you walk into a place and it's pretty dark and you can't see hardly anything, it's not going to make you feel very happy. You're going to maybe feel a little nervous, like, oh, what's there? And then the next word is drafty. Well, drafty means that the air from outside can kind of blow in through the cracks. Well, what do we know about that air from outside? We know it is so cold that the grass on the ground froze. That means it's really cold. It's freezing. So that freezing cold air is blowing in through the cracks. And so it's cold. Okay, there's no fire burning in the fireplace, making the whole place nice and warm and toasty. It's just cold. So now it's dark and freezing cold. So this is not making us feel, oh, isn't this great? What a beautiful place. This is so warm and inviting and comfortable. And, what a nice place to just sit down in front of the fire on a nice comfy sofa and have a cup of hot chocolate and tell stories. And, this is like, there's nobody there. It's dark. You can hardly see anything. And it's freezing cold. And we know that the joy is gone from the whole entire castle, from the kingdom. It's just gone. And they found out that Morgan is not the one who invited them, and they don't even have a book. So, we're not feeling happy. We're like, ooh. And then shadows danced. Well, shadows are dancing because the light is coming from torches. I mean, if we're on a sunny beach outside, a nice hot sunny day, and we look down on the sand and we see our shadow, we're like, oh, that's cool. Look, let's take a picture of our shadow. Shadow selfies, right? The sun is behind us and it's making our shadow shine on the beach. This is not like that. This is because in this very kind of dark area with only those torches, remember the torches are this fire. And because the fire it doesn't stay still, it kind of bops around, right? It's kind of, we could say it dances, it's moving around. That means that the shadows that light cause is going to be moving around too. And it's, you can see right here, this is pretty dark. You're not getting a lot of light from this. So now not only is it kind of dark and freezing cold, but the only things they're seeing are really the shadows and shapes of things. And those, so they're going to be dark shadows, like black shadows. And they're kind of moving around, kind of dancing around like this. Okay, that's spooky. And then the worn tapestries. Well, worn means they're falling apart. They're old. The threads are coming out. They look like they have not, no one is taking care of them. So the picture here is of a place that there's no life. It's old, it's falling apart, it's dark, it's spooky, it's freezing cold. So that feeling that we have just from those two sentences is not one of cheerfulness, of happiness, of feeling comfortable. It's one of feeling like, oh, I don't want to be here. This is not good. This is not great. This is spooky and cold and dark and lonely and not good. And it's a really good image or picture of a place that does not have joy in it. So the author has now said that the problem is no joy. And now she's choosing her words and kind of painting a picture of the place, of the setting, using her words. Okay, the words are the paint. So she's using those words to kind of paint this picture of a place that does not have joy in it and that does not make us feel relaxed and comfortable and happy. So that is one way how the author is using her words to change how we're feeling, to affect how we're feeling. And when you're writing, you can do the same thing. You have the power as the writer to pick your words very carefully to describe the setting in a way that you either can make a person feel happy, make a person feel sad, make a person feel nervous, make a person feel hopeful. So we can change how our reader feels by the words that we use. And if you ever find yourself feeling a little nervous, feeling like the book is a little bit too spooky, here's a tip for you. Pretend for a minute that you're the teacher doing a writing conference with the author. And you're saying to the author, now, why are you using those words? Or do you think you could have some more, can you change your words to da, 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 da? You can think of yourself as having a writing conference with the author to talk about, why are you using these words? What are you trying to do? How do you want the reader to feel? Oh, good job doing that. I see how you want the reader here to feel kind of nervous, kind of like it's spooky. You did a really good job with that. You picked some good words for that. And that's kind of a fun way to notice what the author is doing. Okay, let's see. Wait here, said Morgan. I will tell the king of your arrival. She headed through the huge stone archway that led to the great hall. Let's peek in, Annie said to Jack. Jack pushed his glasses into place. He and Annie walked quietly over to the big arch and peered in. Now, I have peek and peer highlighted in blue because those are both verbs that we can use when we are using our eyes to look at something. When we're peeking, it might be because we're not supposed to be there or we're not there, but we want to have a little quick look at what's going on, even though we're not there. So we kind of take a little peek to see what is going on. The ceiling of the great hall towered high above a stone floor. At the far end of the room, King Arthur and his knights were sitting around a huge round table. They all wore brown tunics. Tunics would be their clothing. They had shaggy hair and beards. So here's a good word choice, shaggy, that the author used. We really only use the word shaggy to describe someone's hair if we're saying that they're not taking care of it. They're not brushing it, they're not washing it, they're not getting it trimmed. they are just not taking care of themselves at all. So that one word can give us the message that these knights are not happy because they're not taking care of themselves. Their names were carved in gold letters on the backs of their chairs. So here we're going to have a look at what the round table looked like. Now, I am going to pause here just a minute and show you a picture that I found on the internet about one of the very first illustrations of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Okay, here it is. So this was a picture taken out of a book that was written, I can't remember, like 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago. This was one of the first illustrations in a book that showed King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So you can see that the table is round, and you can see when they did books back then, they did a lot of artwork in the margins of the pages. You can also see that this language is not something we can read. It's not, I don't know what it is, if it's an Old English or a completely different language, but that is the page that I found. All right, let me move this over here. So the Knights of the Round Table, and we were looking to see how on the back of their chairs, we can see the names that are written on the back of the chairs. And over here is King Arthur talking to Morgan le Fay. Okay. The Knights of the Round Table, whispered Jack. Morgan was talking to King Arthur. Beside the king sat a woman in a plain gray robe. She had pale skin and brown curly hair. Queen Guinevere, whispered Annie. So that would be, I think, this lady right here is how the illustrator is showing us Guinevere. Morgan left the king, and Jack and Annie moved quickly back into the shadows A moment later, Morgan appeared. I told the king that two special friends of his have just arrived, she said. Come with me. As they walked with Morgan through the great hall, Jack shivered. The huge room was drafty and damp. There was no fire in the fireplace. The stone floor was so cold that Jack could feel the chill through his sneakers. Let's take a look at this paragraph that I have circled in pink. Let's look at the words that the author chose. One word is shivered. Jack shivered. Shivered is something we do when we are cold. Then we can see that the room was drafty. Again, when there is a draft, it means the air can come in through the cracks. And usually it means cold air can come in through the cracks. And we know that it is freezing cold outside, which means it is freezing cold inside. It is also damp. That means they can feel moisture. They can feel wetness in the air. There is no fire in the fireplace. And the stone floor was so cold that Jack could feel the chill through his sneakers, which means even though he is wearing shoes, his feet feel cold. That's how cold it is. The bottom of his feet feel freezing, even through his sneakers. So there are many words in that paragraph that are telling us what? It is really cold, right? We have shivering, drafty, no fire, so cold, chill. Again and again and again in that paragraph, we are hearing how cold it is. What I find interesting about that is that it's a really clever way for the author to be pointing out that in this setting, there is no joy. Remember when we talked about the heart and your spirits, and you can feel high or low? Joy is one of those feelings that's up here. When you're feeling joyful or full of joy, your spirits are high. Your heart is full of hope. You're happy. It's a good feeling. You feel full. Down here, the low, also empty, is when we are feeling no joy. We're feeling sad. We're feeling disappointed, no hope, despair. These are not good feelings. When we also can use, so we have high and low, full and empty. We also use warm and cold. So with feelings, those warm feelings are feelings when we are full of joy and happiness, peace, hope. We feel good. Cold feelings are when we feel sad, disappointed, like there is no hope. So in this story, we know that the joy has been taken away from Camelot. And now, and so instead of it being warm feelings, those are cold. They have cold feelings. Not only are the feelings cold, meaning no joy, but the whole room is cold. So there's a physical coldness. Their bodies feel cold, right? It's winter. It's icy and freezing. There's no fire. There's no warmth. There's a draft. Everything has a physical feeling of coldness, just like their emotions, their feelings of no joy is our cold feelings. So it's coldness in two different ways, the way their body feels and the way their mind feels. And so I think that it was clever of the author to make the physical feeling in the room where your body feels cold be the same as the feelings in the mind being cold, meaning no joy. And so it really helps us, the reader, get that feeling of, wow, this place, it's not a happy place. Nothing here feels good. The coldness in our body doesn't feel good. Our feelings in our mind don't feel good. Everything is cold. And it really lets us know what a big problem this is, right? So Jack and Annie, they can solve this problem because that's what they do. This story is going to be about solving this problem. If I am going to make a prediction, it's that at the end of this story, Camelot will have joy in it and people will feel warm. People will feel hope and joy and warm and not so cold. Maybe there will even be a fire in the fireplace. Okay, we're almost to our star. That's where Archie and I ended up. They stopped near the round table. King Arthur stared at them with his piercing gray eyes. "Greetings from Frog Creek," Annie said to the king and queen. Annie bowed, and Jack bowed too. The queen smiled, but King Arthur did not. "Your Majesty, you remember Jack and Annie?" said Morgan. "You met them last summer in my library." And that is where we're going to stop for today. So let me hit my stop share. Okay, thanks for joining us today. See you next time.